Hey everybody. Fog is coming. So, I've made a couple of companions here in the gardens. Different ones, here and there. And it's interesting to me that we're commonly aware, kind of viscerally, if we have any experience of what we call pets, that that companionship enriches our humanity. The companionship with our fish or our snake or our birds or our dogs or our cats. And of course some people have unusual companions. Though I haven't seen it, I'm not surprised to hear. In fact, I'm modestly pleased and a little concerned to hear about, the deep potentials of human-octopus relations, which is suddenly, part of the zeitgeist. So, most of us, not everyone, have had an experience of the nature of our humanity transforming and being enriched in relation with other life forms. And I don't mean by turning them into commodities. That's a different kind of enrichment. That's the, turn bodies into tokens, into stacks of tokens in banks kind of enrichment. I would argue that's defection from actual relation. So I've made a couple of friends here. There's a pair of blue jays that might well be, they seem young to me, and they might well be siblings. What do we have here? Looks probably like an old owl pellet. Though conceivably, I'm pretty sure it's an owl pellet. And so this pair of blue jays has become familiar with me because I bring them, something that they like. And, they're sort of competitive. They're a little bit competitive, but one is far more competitive than the other. And hopefully my audience will forgive me if I suspect that one's male. I've seen pairs of siblings in birds often, and I don't claim to be able to tell, right, their genders explicitly, but there's a motif, right? And there's a motif among all the birds. The males tend to engage in certain kinds of behavior. The females tend to engage in alternate behavior. And there's exceptions, nature's varied. But those birds, when I'm with them, we extend each other. And one of the things that I think it's easy to overlook, because we may wish to dismiss the biblical trope of humans as the shepherds of life. And in my view, that's a somewhat confused dismissal, because there's all kinds of ways in which, let us at least say, the influence of our species is overwhelming in its impact on all the other living relationships. So, I don't want us to dismiss the trope. I don't want us to say, well, we're not really shepherds, nature's the big thing going on, and we're a phenomenon within that, we're a child process of that or something. Except that there's a sort of blindingly confused idea that we're the important thing going on. An anthropocentrism. Anthropocentrism. Yeah, meaning human-centered, but in a weird, sort of broken, egoic way, right? Not in a way that's not only unhelpful, it's crippling. If we adopt such perspectives, we then defect from intimacy and interbeing and syntropy with life, all the living beings. But a long time ago, I was doing Tai Chi, and for a while, over a period of time, this one particular squirrel would come, and it would stand on its hind legs, white belly, very cute, its arms kind of folded in front of it, and it would just observe me. Whatever might have been going on there, any kind of story I make up about it is extremely partial. That's the nature of relation. Our explanations and our narratives capture but the tiniest shred of something, and actually whether they capture it, they capture and transform it, right? So it's not just usually just capture. In any case, the squirrel often came, and one day I thought, I'll bring the squirrel something to eat. And then I realized that whole scenario, which I did, I brought the squirrel something. But one way to think about this scenario is that the squirrel contacted on Earth, right, a human being, and was able to relate with the human being in such a way that human being went in, in the dimension of humans, which is quite distinct from the dimension of squirrels, even though they're on the same world, got that human, not got it, but through relation inclined the human into acting in the human dimension in the squirrel's interest. Now, again, I'm not claiming that's what happened. I'm saying it's a very useful perspective, because the way that we extend each other as living beings, all of the organisms, without exception, is part of why we have old myths and stuff, and strange, new, deceptive, kind of spiritually woo-ish stuff, and rare and precious people who have reestablished something intrinsically mysterious, which is deep, intimate relation with living places and plants and insects and animals, and the moon time in which over which those relationships become apparent, transform, disappear, right? Much like the moon itself, and how there's not just a story there. There's a re-embodiment of relationships so ancient and profound that it's extremely difficult to encompass them with any ordinary language, or at least I find it so. And so if I manage to authentically gain, for example, an intimate relationship with a specific plant. And in case this is sounding bizarre on the surface, let's be very clear that anyone who grows plants, they learn about sort of the secret, emotional, soulful, heartful, union that arises, right, between a plant that one loves and cares for, even if it's in a pot, which I admit is a very strange idea, and one we should think more carefully about in terms of our own lives, because life in a pot isn't necessarily the kind of thing we might want to choose. But though some pots, it's a very protected environment, it's also a very isolated environment. How do you, where does your pollen go? My point, though, is that the humans who have plants and who grow them with any degree of engagement and awareness, we all discover that there are non-ordinary dimensions in this relationship. We don't have to make them, I don't have to declare them to be fundamentally mystical, though they have this connotation for me. They're not merely mechanical. And somehow, perhaps in ways somewhat invisible to us most of the time, the relationship with the plants transforms us, right? There's new space, there's new landscapes for dreaming and insight and healing and understanding and such. These relationships are deep and they are rich, and they're not... You can make narratives about them, and some of those could be useful in people capable of implementing them authentically, or of implementing what they point toward authentically. So my relationship with the plants, or a beehive, or a specific insect that I come across, these transform and extend me because they give me, and some people will say that's just in your imagination. I'll be like, yeah, so is your comment. They extend my interiority, an aspect of my interiority, into other universes of life. Life stranger and more ancient than the sum of human stories. Any one of these organisms is like that. So infinitely deep. A tree of lineages, a little leaf. You're seeing the leaf, right? When I run into, for example, the parasitic wasp from New Zealand that I found in the little man-made pond over here one year. And I rescue it from the pond, right? And I have no idea what it is. My friend Alexi helped me figure it out. I cannot recall the name of it, but it's a parasitic wasp that is particular to the Atlas cedar tree, which turns out to be interesting. These two universes met, right? And there's a transfer there. Right? I live in the world in a way that can rescue a drowning wasp that would otherwise have no opportunity to survive, and I can choose to do so. And this is one of the other weird things about the human side of this thing, is it's almost like, okay, so from one perspective, I'm going to take humans as a very exceptional species for the sake of this perspective. There's the Earth, right? And all of the living beings on it. And they're all organisms, and they become animals and reptiles and so forth. Jungles and incredible storms of life in the ocean, inconceivably diverse and myriad. And then, we don't really know how we got humans around here. I just want to be really clear about that. There's a lot of mystery there. I don't doubt evolutionary models, but neither do I take them as completely conclusive. Right? Humans look like a pretty strange anomaly in more ways than one. If you just look at nature and then you see humans, we really this stuff. I mean, we really stand out as something strange. So it's almost as if nature produced this kind of outer space being, right? This weird, dangerous, potentially alienable, right? I think we're pretty much the only creature that can respond to all of nature with alienation. And this is not modestly important in thinking about how our cultures, there's a projection here onto life from outer space, right? There's a projection there in that, for example, many of the abduction experiences that have been reported by people, which I think are a very complex phenomenon, by the way, I'll take that up another time, involve being treated clinically, right? So that the only thing on Earth I know of that treats anything clinically is us. And that's weird. So it's almost like Earth gave birth to these weird kind of outer space beings, alienable from nature, yet still within nature. And we became sort of a new layer, right, in the biocognitive hyperstructure of Earth, or the biorelational hyperstructures, however you want to think about it. I like to think about it in weird multi-dimensional manifolds that transform over time, but I'm strange that way. And originally, our people were born in deep syntropy with nature, intimacy and awareness, such that it was absolutely clear to our ancient ancestors that each of the plants and the animals is at once its own being and like a doorway into relation that extends both, right? That transforms both participants, so that they, in a sense, can be understood to acquire what we might it's not the right word. It's blatantly obvious with cats and dogs, right? They acquire, in relation with humans, of course it can go badly. The humans can be cruel or mean or insane or drug addicted or whatever, or just stupid. And often, I am. Well, I mean, some of those things, sometimes. The humans can be, it can go really badly for the animals, but when it goes well, it's pretty amazing. The animal is transformed by relation with the human and comes to exist in the human dimension, right? As if there was some kind of space travel here, except it's relational, or dimensional travel at least, which is potentially weirder. Think about it. And similarly, the human, and again, depending on how the human's in the game, or how the humans are in the game, can be profoundly extended by a dog or a cat. That relationship is so deep, right? And all I'm trying to say is, those kinds of relationships, although a pet relationship has very unique features, a companion relationship is more open and freer, right? I don't take the blue jays home with me. And I've heard many stories of people, there's a woman in my neighborhood, I think her name's Maria, older German woman, who has for many years had this incredible relationship with the local raven population. And you can believe she's extended by that relationship, and they as well, right? So there is this weird way in which, when we're really deeply in a kind of intimate relationship with living places and living beings, even for just a few moments, right? Even if we just travel to this opportunity and become present there for a moment, and show up, the living world is very, very different from our models of it. There's layers of universes here that our modernity has completely eclipsed, and part of the way it eclipses it is by telling stories about it. And one might say, well, Darren, you're telling stories about it now. Except I'm not trying to tell a story that says what it is. I don't understand it, meaning that my understanding cannot encompass it, right? In the same way that I don't truly understand water, or any simple thing. Language is very deceptive. We can make noises that refer to stuff like out there, and we think, oh, I know what that is. No. No. In one, in a lexical way, you know what the symbols correspond to. But that doesn't tell you anything about the nominatum, the thing the sign points at, right? If I say the moon, it doesn't tell you anything about the moon. So filling those tokens with content, meaningful content, is part of the task of a lifetime. And one of the things I'm trying to highlight here is that if we're missing these layers of relation, that the animal we are is made in and of and for, right? It won't be likely. We will still be humans and we'll still have human experience and so on and so forth, but we're missing like 90%, of what's this is the kind of tragic impoverishment that I believe we must learn to address together, right? We have to remember together, and not according to some creed, what it means to be in deep relation with living places and plants and animals and insects and fish and birds and, all of the herbs and all of the food plants and their relationships that they have between each other. Like we've learned over time, for example, in agricultural contexts, that certain plants do very well together. And some plants clearly don't do very well together. Relationships. Now, is there some mystical underpinning there? Well, we could probably find a scientific structure to do reductionism with, and say, for example, well, this root bacteria, these roots are symbiotic with this array of bacteria, and these roots are symbiotic with this other array of bacteria, and these two bacterial constellations conflict fundamentally somehow, right? Sure. That's not the whole truth, though. The fact that we can identify a mechanism doesn't mean the process is mechanistic. It means that reductionism is relatively dependable in a particular lane of knowledge, right? But that knowledge is it fails to include the native freedom of relational dimensionality, meaning, identity, right? When we say, like, if x equals z, x plus 1 equals z plus 1, the degree of truth is very useful in the incredibly narrow context, but x has no content. Z has no content. I'm just stating an axiom. Right? So my point was that we're born for travel in a relational, in layered arrays of relational hypersystems in nature. Our bodies are made of this, and our minds are made for it, but our ideas hide this. They inhibit it, mostly. And it's weird. We can have ideas, we can inhibit it two different ways with ideas, right? One is by saying, well, that's impossible. That's no part of any kind of reality I'm familiar with, or will be. And that's a pretty good inhibition. But the other one, which is just as weird in its own way, is, oh, I know how that works. Yeah, right? And here's how it works, and a long explanation. I mean, I can toy with models and stuff, and sometimes that's interesting or useful. But the situation is profusely mysterious. It's mysterious in maybe a nearly infinite number of ways, right? It'll never be encompassed by some description, though descriptions can point toward it. When I develop a relationship with a plant or an insect or an animal, I'm connecting the human dimension to their entire lineage, all the way back to the beginning of life. There's a reunion moment, right, between the humans and the parasitic male wasp, or between the humans and the blue jay, or between the humans and the oregano plant. And it goes both ways, right? I am enriched by the lineage of the being I'm in relation with, and that being acquires a friend in the kind of weird outer space of the human world. And we're the only, one of the weirdest things about us is we can get things wrong and completely fuck shit up and just factory kill whole universes. On the other hand, I mean, as a species, we do this all the time. But on the other hand, we're one of the weird exceptions in nature where if another animal is injured or in a bad situation, and often this is because there's humans in the first place, but not always, we can intervene. Isn't that weird? That nature produced just one animal with the capacity to complexly intervene in the suffering of other animals. It's a very peculiar feature for earth creatures. Now, it's not that no other creature can protect or help another creature. They can, but the number of domains, and like they can't help them fix a broken wing, right? And it was really interesting recently when somewhere on the internet I saw noises about looking for the first signs of intelligence in humans. And one, I think, bold and actually intelligent researcher said, you know, well, what we have here is fairly clear evidence of an assisted healing in a bone break, you know, many thousands of years ago, right? And that's what she's pointing out as evidence of intelligence, care, right? The capacity to act to relieve the suffering of another being, or to intentionally enrich the life and potentials of another being. Now, of course, all of this kind of thing I'm talking about, we do it between us too, because each of us is in the human dimension very uniquely, right? So in the same way, we're very familiar with this game. We just most of us don't really believe we can play that with nature. Like, we don't believe there's a tree here that could get me a job. Like a good job. But there probably is. I mean, yeah, I guess that sounds superficially ridiculous. But what I'm trying to say is that the other living beings are in the world in a much more complex and rich way than we imagine, simply because we don't know. Like, we probably tried talking to animals and stuff at some point, and trees and things as a child, some of us anyway. I did. And I was really confused that it didn't work. It took a long time before I realized that it wasn't the words that do the communicating. It's one's... See, this is the really weird thing. There's no word for this in English that's very good. They're all value-laden. In my torso, there is something very emotional, very deep and resonant and heartful and profound. And it's that thing, that aspect of me, that actually listens to the insect or the plant, and it's blind intellectually. It's blind. Right? It's not a thinking thing. And also speaks, sometimes in images, but often just in ache, right? In resonating awe or wonder or reverence, ecstasy, reunion, these very deep emotions. And I'm not claiming that I have these emotions all the time, but when I slow down and I'm present, then the doorway between me and the living world begins to open a little bit, right? And now these opportunities for deep, meaningful relationships with living places and beings, whether they're momentary or ongoing, they appear. And they often have non-ordinary, each of the beings is not a person, but they are unique. They're unique. Well, I mean, it's all kinds of things going on. For one thing, they're like the expression of a tree of lineages. And not just the tree of the lineages of like, this is an oak tree. Let's trace it back to the first oak tree and before, and the first, life on Earth. It's not just, that's not the only tree that's there. That tree is surrounded by a very complex cloud of symbiotic relationships, abiotic relationships, right? Things that kill. Parasitic relationships, right? All these things. And these words aren't very good. They're just the ones we commonly use. So yeah, when you touch any living being, the essence of this being, or it touches you, as sometimes happens when we're available, it's possible to experience something that there are no reasonable stories about in any of the human literature at all. The humans have the capacity to join the lineages of life. And this is one of our unique assets that's easily overlooked in modernity, and we're not given the foundations that we need. Though many of us have natural affinities, right? And so some of us really need help, right? There's other people that will say, if I speak this way, like, well, how do I, what do I do if I want to make friends with a tree? And I mean, I tend to give really simplistic advice, right? Like, learn about the tree, spend time with the tree, bring it something good. It might be water, or you could bring it some dirt. The dirt isn't gonna, make the tree like bringing it a fruit salad or something. It's the intention of making a gift, right? Like, I carry you with me when I'm not with you. This thing, right? I carry you with me when I'm not with you. You're part of me, and I bring you this offering that we may become acquainted, right? And of course, you don't want to force yourself on anything, right? You want to feel your way into the thing, and just spend time, pay attention. Hopefully, it's a tree you have some, curiosity about, some interest in, some esteem for, right? Like you really like this tree. For some reason, it speaks to you in some way, right? So it's a selective thing, but there's also an overall general thing where, like when I'm walking around in this living place right now, partly I'm speaking for the living place, right? Not just for my own agenda, which I mistrust. At least modestly, because once I start making face noises, things get a little strange. The life around me now is the living moment of vast lineages of life. So when I touch this leaf, right, with awareness, there's a reunion. This is part of what is meant by the word communion. Not so much we come together to eat food, but rather we remember one another from before. I remember you from before. Before what? All the befores. Before everything. When nature sets these little bubbles of life adrift together, but also apart, right? Both and more. Each unique one gathers it gathers richness, yeah? Personal experience of the universe, of time-space. And it's also like the vessel of its entire people and all their relationships and all of this, right? So it's a really profound thing to encounter a life form at all. If you were out in space and if you just point in a direction and follow that line, your chances of encountering anything like a complex terrestrial organism, I can't say exactly what they are, they're actually unknown, but intuitively they seem profoundly slim to me. So the fact that there's all this life here is actually, this is what I'm trying to get across, we used to travel in the relational networks, and some people still know this, right? If I went to some specific indigenous tribe and I talked in this way in their language, I'm sure they would laugh and say, of course. I mean, we never talk about that because it's just as obvious as oxygen, right? But yes, of course this is so. We live in this universe of multiply embodied nearby realities that we can transfer to and travel in. Now that's a very exotic experience for any kind of modern human being. It could be profoundly confusing to them. It's sometimes been confusing to me. In this sense, the majority of humans are like birds who got really interested in making stairs and worshipping stairs and stopped flying and just made a lot of staircases. We've lost this essential thing that each of us is born with, you know, uniquely, and some less and some more, and some, you know, in a particular angle. They have a particular angle on the thing. On Earth, unity has precedence. Now, I think everywhere unity has precedence. All this stuff comes from, well, it's complex to make simple language about it. Everything alive, though, here, it shares origins and lineages and histories, and they traveled all together, right? So the lines of history are for the elm tree and the honeybee and the, you know, the clam, right? They were all together in time. And the ones that are with us now are those that survived and managed to propagate and become successful in the time we live in. Until, you know, maybe 100, 200 years ago, when we started as a species actively wiping stuff out. So in a sense, in nature, we are each other's bodies, right? Our thinking is not much like this. We are each other's family, fundamentally, in a way that's so overwhelming to directly experience that we'd probably kind of forget about religion, or maybe we'd have very different ones. And I was just thinking about this and having some experience of it today while I was walking. And I thought, well, I'll wander around the topic for a bit and see if I can get anywhere. So thank you for joining me for my little experiment and my exercise today. And I wish you every good thing, and hope that you may find a door, if you haven't already, into the living places and the sacred relationships of all the living beings. Yeah. Bye-bye for now.